Good afternoon. My name is Kumar Subramaniam. I lead the Safe Tower team, and we're here today to talk about our practical learnings from using artificial intelligence to unlock power of data in safety and quality processes. Quick introduction. I'm here with my colleague, Eileen Kazda. We are a spin out from Johns Hopkins. We spun out after we deployed our software at Johns Hopkins for 3.5 years. We deployed during the pandemic, April of 21. And what we are about to share with you today is not theory. We're not going to talk assumptions. We're just going to tell you what we found. And it's going to be where we are in our journey today. Okay? We're not going to talk about issues around governance, etc. We're going to just tell you what we found when we went down this path of using artificial intelligence in the processes of safety management. One quick point of order: when we say artificial intelligence, we include a whole swathe of tools in it, right? We use machine learning, we use natural language processing, we use generative AI, and all of these tools combined is what we call artificial intelligence when we use that term. One word about generative AI, we're very cautious about using it. We believe that there's a place for Gen AI in safety. We definitely don't think it's ready for clinical decision support, if you will. And so we're using it for the simplest possible ways. And as you will discover from us today, we are using it to reduce the administrative burden on nursing teams, on safety staff, and others. So again, practical learnings from the use of advanced algorithms in safety, patient safety practices. I'm absolutely delighted to present to you my colleague, Eileen Kazda, who is the inventor of this software and was responsible for deploying it all across the Johns Hopkins ecosystem in April of 21. She has had the pleasure of working with luminaries such as Kathleen Sutcliffe, who is one of the leaders in the HRO field, if you will, Dr. Alan Kachalia, and others from Johns Hopkins who have helped her along the way. So without further ado, let me introduce you to Eileen Kazda.
Thank you. All right. All right. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for taking some time out of your afternoon and having lunch with us. Much like Kumar was telling you, in my previous role, I used to be the director of patient safety for the Armstrong Institute. And one of the programs that my team led was our voluntary event reporting initiatives for our health system. And there were all sorts of questions and challenges that would come out in kind of my day-to-day operational role. Senior leaders would sometimes turn to me and say things like, how is the next patient going to be harmed? And I would turn around and I would say to my team, well, what do you guys think? And they would shift through a bunch of Post-it notes that they had connected to their computers. They might look at recent agendas of safety topics that we had identified. And they would ideally try to list off a series of safety risks that raised the hair on the back of their neck. But when we stepped back, we realized that we didn't really have a systematic way of thinking about all of the safety risks that were coming in. Every day, our organization would get about 120 voluntary reported events, and every day, 120 new one would come in. And we were constantly doing this jockeying of risks approach, trying to prioritize the greatest threats to safety, but really didn't have tools to kind of help us think about that. And then another scenario that would often come up, I would step back to my team and they would come over to me and they would say, I found this really scary near miss. What do you think about it? And inevitably, I would turn around and annoy them, asking them additional questions like, well, how many times has this event been reported? What areas did you see it in? And over time, I realized that I was actually disincentivizing my analysts to speak up when they saw safety risks because I would send them on a wild goose hunt into the event reporting system to try to get stronger signals. Does these challenges resonate with any of you? Yeah, I see a lot of head nodding. So those are just some of the concerns that I would struggle with day to day in trying to identify the greatest risks for safety. But I also had a slew of concerns as an operational leader, trying to help communicate how well we were doing in actually responding to these concerns. A common scenario that would come up as a leader, maybe wanting to make sure we were adequately responding to the things that had been reported, would say things to me like, well, how long is it taking for us to kind of complete an RCA? What's kind of the start to finish time? And what happened to that action item? Did we actually get it implemented? And who was supposed to implement it? And what would happen is my team would turn around and they would dig into Excel files or Microsoft Teams applications, and they had created all sorts of workarounds to try to be able to answer the administrative and operational challenges of how well are we actually responding and managing these risks. And I would step back and I would just find myself wondering, why is it so hard to have helpful information to do my day-to-day job? Does that challenge resonate with you as well? Yeah, a lot of head nodding as well. So as I reflected on the current state of our event reporting and safety analytic efforts, and really our organization's desire to be more highly reliable, I realized that the design of our tools were really hindering our improvement efforts. Our event reporting software felt like it was set up more like a help desk ticket. An event would come in, we would read it, we'd route it to somebody, we'd close it, and we'd move on to the next one. And every day, new events would come in and we would do the same thing. But in reality, what we would see is that these events would come in and they looked more like a spaghetti map diagram. We'd learn something about the event, we'd send it to someone else, they'd learn something, we'd send it to someone else, but the workflows were set up very linearly and did not support that. Additionally, we felt like we were very reactive in our approach to responding to events. I feel like we often would describe our work as a game of whack-a-mole. I know that that analogy probably resonates with a lot of people in here. You're constantly putting out fires and you don't feel like you're actually getting to be proactive in responding to the things. And your teams probably say things to you like, saw that coming, and then you feel awful that you didn't actually get ahead of it. And we'd step back and we would say, why is it that the RCA is the only real tool that we're using in our toolbox? There's so many great investigation tools out there, but if we wanted to investigate something, we were pretty much saying, let's do an RCA on that. But RCAs were and can be very resource intensive. We were finding wide variability in how RCAs were conducted across our enterprise. Then we would step back and be like, oh, feels like Groundhog's Day because we just got the same event in again that we just did an RCA on. I see some people chuckling. I know that likely feels like a similar challenge. And then we would step back and we'd say, why did that happen? And we'd realize that it's because we weren't actually doing as good of a job at implementing really robust error-proofing strategies. And some of that is because maybe we were missing tools to help us assess the feasibility of those strategies, or even the sustainability of the action items that we were implementing. Just because we implemented the action item doesn't mean that it's relevant across time, and perhaps those things need to be revisited. And then we were finding that the interventions we were putting in place were largely at the sharp end. They were things we were saying to the front end, be more careful and follow this policy, but we weren't looking further upstream to see that there were opportunities to better equip the front line to actually have better impacts, or that the risks of leadership decisions were flowing down to front line. So as we stepped back and thought about our journeys, we kind of had an aha moment when we realized that a lot of the improvement tools that we had had to date for safety and quality have really been focused on perhaps maybe the front line or the patient, but that we hadn't made enough progress in thinking about the tools that safety leaders and quality leaders and professionals need to do their everyday jobs. And instead, we were jerry-rigging all sorts of things to try to do this. And so some of the spirit in which we have approached our journey is to try to bridge gaps in tools that are missing kind of actionable insights and ways to better integrate signals. And so rather than having all of our products live in silos where maybe the event reporting tool is separate than the patient relations tool, which is separate than our RCA module, we're trying to shift our thinking to think about these things differently. As I step back, another aha moment in our journey was when we realized that the data that we capture for patient safety is often largely qualitative data. But the data and the tools that we often had available to us out of the box of our current products were quantitative in nature. And so we felt like we didn't have the right tool for the job. We had a hammer, we needed a wrench. And as a result, we were finding that we were sometimes even making the wrong conclusions around patient safety when we were applying the wrong tool to the problem. And I'll give you an example of that. We would see situations where staff would be jockeying around the codes of the themes of the event. So imagine an event is submitted, it comes in, perhaps it's identified as a fall, but embedded in that event description around a fall is also a communication error and is also a handoff and is also a medication error. And we would see jockeying around of what is the primary event type. But our tools were so limiting that we could only assign one event type to that. And often people would want to assign the outcome event type because they were trying to measure what those events were. And then when they would remove the code, they would take it off everybody else's screen and they would lose access to see that safety event. So that's kind of one example. Another example that we would see where the qualitative data had been applied perhaps not as thoughtfully is in the counting of some of our events. Our event reporting efforts had really turned into a little bit of a, can we count how many safety events are happening and use this as an indicator of how more or less safe we are? But we weren't using the voluntary reporting data as really insights into our reporting culture. As you guys know, I'm not telling you anything you don't know, reporting patterns can be impacted by so many different things, regulatory bodies, culture, a pandemic, and counting this data isn't necessarily particularly helpful in knowing how more or less safe we are, but it is sometimes helpful in identifying patterns in reporting and where our prioritization of concerns may lie. Sorry, I'm just trying to figure out why this slide is not advancing. So, frustrated in our journey, we stepped back and we thought there had to be a better way. The vendors that we were working with, they really were focusing on capturing more events, and many of us have probably done that in our journey. And not to send the message that more events is necessarily a bad thing, but as an operational leader, I didn't necessarily need more data when I wasn't able to consume the amount of data that I already had. I already had 120 things a day to keep me up at night about, and 120 new ones coming in. And so we wanted to be very thoughtful in thinking about if we're going to ask frontline staff to report more events, we need to make sure that we have the means to actually do something with that data that they're speaking up about. Another challenge that we were seeing is in an effort to streamline reporting, we all want to make reporting quick and efficient for frontline. We were stripping away the narrative and we were saying things like, let's put a lot of categorical questions on the frontline form. And it was actually taking the frontline reporter more time to submit an event, answering all these questions so that we didn't have to investigate them later, rather than saying, just tell us what happened, give us a free text narrative, and we'll take it from there. So part of our approach is really to focus in on the qualitative narrative and not dilute the value of that. We also find that there's so much value in the way people speak about safety that can be learned from event reporting and other qualitative safety data. It's not just what happened in the event. It could be the response to the event. Maybe it's indicative of our maturity around just culture and how reviewers speak to reporters about safety concerns. So we saw lots of opportunities here. So some of our early findings, I had mentioned that we had shifted our approach here. As we have focused really on the qualitative data, we have seen that on average, we see about 4.5 different themes identified in a single event report, where previous tools only allowed us to capture kind of one event type. We have also seen a tremendous amount of improvement in how we communicate about safety events with a tool that is more transparent and collaborative. In our approach, we have completely opened up the frontline the reporting tools so that frontline staff can go in and they can read the events that they have submitted. They can also receive follow-up about these events. In some of our previous tools, we had jerry-rigged the tools to be able to send emails to the frontline reporters, letting them know what we did as a safety event. And we were so proud. At the time, we had about 30% of our frontline staff receiving information back about their event. In a transparent tool like we have implemented now, we are seeing frontline staff getting about 96% of their events back with feedback about their event. And it's not just a canned template. It doesn't say like, thank you so much for reporting. We're actually telling them what we did as a result of their event submitted. What we are seeing, though, in our early findings is that the frontline are so engaged. They're now saying things to us like, thank you so much for telling me what you did about my event. Now, can you actually do a better job of fixing it so it doesn't happen? And so they're forcing us and motivating us to do a better job with implementing. We have also, with a very transparent and collaborative reporting system, we've also made significant progress in engaging physicians in reporting and have increased the volume of event reports by physicians by about 36%. So with that, I'm going to hand it back off to Kumar and let him tell you a little bit about how we're using artificial intelligence in this space to support these workflows.
Let me go back one slide. I think the one thing that I'd like to share with the group is I mentioned earlier we use a whole slew of advanced algorithms to do what we do. Among the tools we use when we look at narratives, we are using natural language processing to identify what themes are in the event, and then we're using machine learning to kind of design the cutoff scores to make that the right theme show up for the right events. And we've been doing this now for about 3.5 years. The solution is now bug-free, if you will. Hopkins has been using it. What we've also done using our machine learning algorithms is to help Hopkins design their taxonomy in a way that's flexible for their use. Hospital systems change all the time. Hospital systems change all the time. They introduce new departments. They introduce new ways of doing work. They have new definitions for how people speak about events, right? And so your tool has to stay abreast. And so what we have done with machine learning here is to help organizations keep a flexible taxonomy, not locked into what they designed on day one, but as the system matures, your taxonomy moves with it. So that's one of the advantages that we have created for Hopkins. The whole idea here ultimately is that you create an open platform where not only patient voluntary reporting happens, but if you decide to then bring in triggers from your electronic medical record, you can now pipe that into that workflow and then have the right people look at information that is now mixed with voluntary as well as triggered information. We have we're not biased towards one way or the other. Hopkins happened to go down the voluntary reporting path first. If and when they come back with a triggered solution, a system should be flexible enough to handle it. So we're going to talk about the journey that we have experienced in using machine learning and AI. We see this as a process which starts with better data collection, people working with the data that's been collected, applying AI tools to such data, and then making sure that you're able to track it in real time. And the key difference that I'll point out to you is we don't see analytics as something that's done to the data after it lands in the database, in the sense that we don't limit it to reporting and applying Tableau and Power BI and such tools to the data. We want to provide actionable information to the reviewing managers, the frontline leaders, to say, okay, what is happening in my system? So that's the difference that, if anything, we'd like for you to take away is that we don't see this as a problem to apply to the data after it has settled in our database. We'd like for it to be as near real time as possible. So the three things that we did as part of this journey is, one, we are using AI to reduce information asymmetry. What do we mean by that? What we are trying to say here is a reporter submitted an event. The reviewing manager knows a lot. He's an expert in that area. They do something with that information. The reporting individual gets to see what's happening, gets to participate in the follow-up process. And even though they may have reported the event anonymously, they are still able to follow through. So we are kind of making sure that everyone who's involved in the event, not just the reviewing managers and leaders, but even the reporters, have now visibility into what's happening. The second thing we do is and this is something that's very unique to what we do, we allow you to explore and exploit at the same time. When we say exploit, what we're trying to say is you have defined ways of doing things, you have the information you need to make a decision, that's exploitation. But if you are also wanting to discover what's happening, you don't know enough, you want that information to be gathered, and then you can look at it and say, okay, now what do we do with this information? We enable that as well on a single dashboard. So, for example, if somebody is reporting an event, wouldn't it be nice if we were to tell them whether similar events have happened across the system? And I imagine doing that across your entire hospital system and having it on one dashboard while you're looking at the current event that's come in. You can scroll down the list, you can find out where that event has happened, you can call that person, and you can engage with them and say, okay, what did you do here? How did we solve the problem? So that's an appropriate use of AI to kind of surface up intelligence or hidden insights to your team members. The third one is detection of patterns and trends. A lot of times we find that we just don't know what's happening across the system and how that may present itself. We all may know, for example, that people are being scheduled for appointments because something is wrong in your user interface on your electronic medical record. Fine. But did you know that there were problems with a particular tool on a particular floor that otherwise would have gone, you would never have caught it? What we do is we look at the data as it's coming in, and we help cluster these information sets into discrete clusters so you can take a look at them. And then what we do is we allow you to take them into collections and then move them into an action and analysis module where you can now not just do investigations and RCA, for example, on one event, but you can take clusters of events that look similar, feel similar, and then do a common cause analysis on that information. Does that make sense? And then, of course, because we are rooted in high reliability organizing thinking with help from Kathleen Sutcliffe and others, we wanted to kind of share with you 3 separate use cases practically that we have experienced at Hopkins using these three principles. For example, reluctance to simplify is one of the principles that we have. The whole idea is we should not be simplifying an event by assigning one theme to the event. We should be able to figure out as many themes there are in the event and to bring that to the reviewing manager's attention and let them decide, which is the deference to expertise, to say, let them decide how and what should be investigated. So this is, again, one way to use machine learning and AI to kind of refuse to simplify a safety event, if you will. And we're applying the same principles to complaints and grievances as well. So as you can imagine, common tools used multiple times in different situations, adapted, really helps you speed up and accelerate your safety improvement projects, if you will. The sensitive operations is one thing that we were, and Eileen has said this before, we were very careful to ensure that we provided all of the users, the reporters, the reviewing managers, the leaders, a simple interface that allowed them to use a very modern tools like your Teams chat or your messaging system to collaborate on what needed to happen with a safety event. So again, how do you make that happen? How do you figure out what terms to bring up in the collaboration chat? And how do you let them engage with each other was one other use for AI in this space. And finally, we've talked about the deference to expertise in terms of making sure that the right people have the right information at the right time and that they can use that information to talk to each other. Ultimately, it takes a tribe of us to kind of make improvements in patient safety, and allowing that to happen is the key requirement that was put in front of us to designing an AI ML-based system. Lastly, I'll say this, there are plenty of systems out in the market. They're all good, but what we think is the opposite of a good idea is another good idea, right? So there are, what was appropriate for at a certain time was great. Now it's time for us to move to the next level. And hopefully we have kind of given you something to think about, and we're happy to take questions. Yes? The question was, what is the safety reporting platform? We've got a nice name for it. It's called Hero.
Is it available?
So it is, we built it ourselves because we were frustrated with what's available in the marketplace. Anybody else?
Go ahead.
Take that.
How did we, yeah, the question, just for those who can't hear, the question is how do we reduce bias in our AI and our data? And I love this question because I think that as an industry, we have not spent enough time talking about how all of our data is already biased. And I think we need to actually spend more time thinking about the limitations of the data that comes in and how we manage them. We do have some things that we have done with respect to our AI to try to prevent like model degradation and stuff. The taxonomy that we use in our event reporting solution was actually built off of 10 years of Johns Hopkins historical data. And so we're not just plugging this into ChatGPT and spitting out a bunch of themes about these events. And my team of analysts used to code all of this data. But what we would do now with other organizations who work with us is we would take this taxonomy and we would optimize it for that organization using your historical data so that it's unique to you. I think there's also some ways to, for example, in healthcare, we use all sorts of acronyms and things like that. There's ways to modify the taxonomies to help address those. Every time you see this acronym, make sure you assign these codes. But I think it's important to know that when we do that, we're introducing a certain level of bias into the data, and so we also have to think about that. So we have tried to be thoughtful in our approach to bias, but have also spent as much time recognizing the limitations of our bias in the data that's inherently there and is in our data, whether we use AI or not. Did I do okay? What other questions can we answer? I think one thing that we didn't make a point to in our approach that I want to kind of nail home is our goal here is not to take the human out of the process and replace it with advanced analytics. Our goal here is to really allow the human to have new insights to be able to do their job better. In my previous role, I used to step back and think like, wow, out of my resources for patient safety, 80% of them are going towards manipulating data and only 20 of them going towards actually improving safety. And I wanted to figure out how can we flip this so that we can put our highly skilled humans back to work doing safety and let them work at the top of their skill set and use analytics and software as a way to kind of help flip that model, because as you guys probably know, you're constantly being asked to do more with less, and the challenges are just very real. So, yes? Yeah. Yeah, it's a great question. So the question is about outcomes. We have not necessarily spent a ton of time measuring our impact on outcomes. When we went live with this product, we actually purposely weren't trying to improve, we're trying to increase reporting. That's a common question that we get, though. We already had so much data that we didn't need more. But what we were trying to do was do a better job of actually responding to the data that we got. And so some of what we've done to look at outcomes, in addition to some of those metrics that I kind of shared, was we've also coded and looked at the quality of the feedback that we are providing staff and how well we're responding to these events. I think that that's an interesting discussion too. Like, does every single event need to have the same level of response? Some things you might just put in to capture in a peer review privilege protected space so you can use that data. Some might need a deeper investigation, but overall we've seen a shift in the quality of the reviewers' feedback. And we have also seen a shift. We used to code the strength of our error-proofing strategies used in each event. That's also incredibly manual to do, and so we've been trying to bring some artificial intelligence to help us code those things so humans aren't having to do that to actually answer your questions. But as far as looking at the amount of outcomes, I wouldn't say we have a great way to do that, and I wouldn't say we had a great way to do that before, because often, as you guys know, sometimes the more you dig, the better you can actually see the pattern, and it does the reverse of what you'd expect. So.
And one other piece of information we'd like to share, which is you can't really achieve much until the organization is ready to move in a certain direction, right? You can't force something on an entire team and expect them to suddenly adopt it. So we focus a lot of our time and energy on creating a tool that would support your culture of safety initiatives, that would support your just culture initiatives. And that was what we tried to do with all of our transparency, our feedback, our follow-up measurement, the quality of the dialogue that happened between reporters and reviewing managers. We saw that shift over time where it became less confrontational and more collaborative. So you need to establish a baseline, a platform, and then you can do other brilliant things with the information that you have, right? So that's where we are. We haven't solved everything, so.
No, definitely have not.
Thank you again.
Yeah, thank you.